more than a little bit excited. I don't know if you can see. Let me zoom in. You see one of our pine trees there with all the rain that we've had. It's a fairly large pine tree. It's kind of bittersweet because we are going to lose this pine tree. The most recent flood washed the bank out from under it, and it has slipped down into our little side creek. We have 3 creeks on our property, and it has slid down into this little creek. But the sweet part of it, that's the bitter part, we're going to lose it. We'll have to cut it up to get it out of the creek. But the sweet part, well, let me just show you. Okay, here's what I want to show you. I'm going to zoom in on it, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. You see that? This here is gold. Literal gold. Well, figurative gold. It's pine sap. This is one of the best medicines that you will ever find in a wilderness setting. I will put a link to Medical Missionary Press. A friend of ours, Bob Jorgensen, he's deceased now, but he had a severe injury to his head in a vehicle accident, and he used pine sap to heal the wound. Pine sap is very sticky, so it can be used particularly in a wilderness setting or survival setting, but even in a homestead day-to-day setting, to suture wounds, to bind the wound together. I've done that with my husband. He cut his hand really bad one time, and we put pine sap on it, and it was just looked almost as though he had had sutures by a plastic surgeon. The wound healed beautifully. Pine sap is also pain relieving. It's analgesic. It's antibacterial. It keeps the wound from becoming infected. It's just wonderful stuff, and so I have been collecting this, and since this tree is going to die, I'm going to see if I can't put a significant wound on the tree with a hatchet and try to collect actual sap, the liquid sap. What this is on the tree has dried a little bit, and I'll show you in just a minute what I'm doing with that. I've already collected some of it, and let me show you what I did. Earlier this morning, I just happened to be walking on our property, and I found that the tree had slipped down. And I'm trying to speak up because the creek is kind of loud. I'll check the volume when I edit. But I've got sticky pine sap all over my little mora, but a little turpentine will take that off. And turpentine is made from the pine sap, and it's good for like parasites and stuff like that. But at any rate, all I did when I came out here earlier was these blobs, like right here, that are on the tree. I just took my knife and just scraped that blob off. It's fairly soft. When it's exposed to the air longer, the sap hardens into resin. Down here in the South, we call it rosin. If you've ever heard rosin up your bow, that's what they use on like violin and cello bows. They put pine resin on the bow to help it, slide better across the strings and not be so catchy, grabby. But anyway, what I'm doing with this, because it does have a little bit of impurity in it, I've been heating it and making a pine sap salve out of it. I want to wound the tree and put a bucket and see if I can actually collect the sap itself. And if I can do that, that will really be a blessing, because the pine sap you could put in little vials, and then if you have an injury, you can just take a little toothpick and dip down in the vial and just drop the pine sap right into the wound and then pull it together with some butterflies. It works very well. I've done it many times. Certainly I'm not prescribing this, but I'm telling you what we do and how it works. Our wounds have never had an infection. We've avoided sutures, stitches on several occasions, and so this is something very important to know. If you're backpacking or in a survival situation and wounded, this will keep the wound from becoming infected and can also help to pull wound edges together. If you put that in there and wrap it with a bandana or even just put some tape across it, it will help to hold the wound edges together. So let me zoom in just a little bit and I'll see if I can show you what I'm doing to harvest it, and then we'll go in the house and I'll show you what I'm doing to make the actual pine sap salve. Okay, this right here has quite a bit of contamination in it and it's a little bit harder, but this whole knot right here is partly resin and partly sap. So I'm going to scrape this off, and then I don't know if this will show up on the camera, but here on this underside was where sap was actually dripping. And so probably next week, I'm not going to do it today because it's almost Sabbath, but maybe sometime next week I want to come and wound this tree down this side here and see if I can't direct the sap into a container and just let it drip and see if I can't collect some gold. So I'm panning for gold here. But all I did was, this one back here was very soft. I don't know if you can see that it's actually moving, just touching it with my knife. This one is harder, and like I said, it's more contaminated. It's very sticky. I was just down in Alabama at my parents' farm, and my dad had been in the back pasture with his backhoe, and he wounded a pine tree like this fairly severely. And I was out walking in the back pasture, and I happened upon this pine tree, and I got a gallon of rosin off of one tree. Okay, let me show you what this looks like up close. I don't know if it's going to show up. My camera will have to refocus. So see, it's kind of pliable yet. Actual rosin or resin is more. It's harder, and if you hit it like with a hammer or something, it'll shatter into powder. But this is still fairly pliable. I'm going to melt this down. I'll show you when we go back to the house what I do with it. Trying to use some caution here because the bank is undercut here where the tree slid down into the creek. But I wanted you to see, if I can get it in the frame here. Let me see. I can't tell for sure if it's in the frame, but I think it is. Yeah, that's the pine sap dripping down. And if I can wound this tree on this underside here so that it will drip into a container, that would be absolutely wonderful. So I have the cook stove going. It's a little bit chilly outside, and I have an old camp pot that I didn't mind sacrificing, and that is the pot that I'm making the salve in. Let me see if I can get this set up so I can show you a little bit better. So I've got pine sap all over my camera from my hands. You can see this is some that I already had melted that I collected this morning, and right here is what we just collected off of that tree. And we'll put it in here and let that melt down, which won't take too long. And the impurities, of course, will kind of go to the bottom. I'll pick out the big pieces, like if there's any bark or anything in there, I'll pick that out with a stick And I don't throw it away because it's a very good fire starter. So I put it on this piece of cardboard, you know, the trash pieces. And in the morning when I start our fire to knock the chill off, I'll throw this in, and boy, is that a good fire starter. It's also a good thing to keep in your backpack in a container because it's so sticky. But already it's beginning to melt, and I have no idea what the recipe is for the salve, but while that melts I'll show you. This is salve that I made this morning, and it's very nice. It's a soft texture, kind of a stringy. It is sticky, but it's not too bad. You can just rub it on. I think you could use it on your lips, like for chapped lips. One thing that I do is I put a little bit of coconut oil around the lid here and on the inside of the lid, because if you get any on there, I mean, it's like glue. You can't get the lid open very well, but that is very good wound healing salve. So we'll get this melted down. Like I said, I have no idea what the recipe is. What I do is I melt it down. I just kind of eyeball. So each batch is just a little bit different. But in any kind of a salve or lotion, beeswax will give it the consistency. And you know, if you want a firmer, like a salve or a cream, you use a little bit more beeswax. And if you want it thinner, like a lotion, you use a little bit less. So I'm using, I put beeswax. I have, you'll see, I'll show you in just a minute. I have little BB-like things of beeswax. And then I put some coconut oil. That helps to keep the sap from hardening up into resin. So, and I also put just a little bit of olive oil in some of the recipes. I haven't in all of them, but mostly it's coconut oil and beeswax. But we'll let this melt and soften up, and then I'll come back and show you what I put in it and about how much. Okay, it's all melted. I took it off of the flame spreader for just a minute to kind of hasten things. One thing I have noticed is that the resin that I got from my mom's trees down in Alabama is a darker color. This stuff here that I got off of our tree is a lighter color. I don't know if that has to do with the variety of the tree or what. But if you do choose to do this, I recommend you use utensils that you don't mind dedicating just to pine sap, because it'll just about ruin them for anything else. So there are a few impurities in here. I'm not going to worry about it, because whenever you pour the salve excuse me, up into the container, the impurities tend to sink to the bottom as the salve hardens. So this is my beeswax pellets, or whatever they call it. I don't know, I guess that's maybe 1/3 of a cup for the amount of pine sap. You saw how much pine sap I had in there. So that's at least 1/3 of a cup. So I'm going to put that amount in there, and this is supposed to fold over. Anyway, we'll pour that in. It's probably a little bit more than I've put in my other recipes, but I've got a little bit more sap too. So that's the beeswax, and then we'll melt that in. And then for the coconut oil, I've got some melting in my little baby skillet, and I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons of coconut oil. This is the skillet that we melt our coconut in for our popcorn. So that's it. That's all I do to it. I just melt it all together, and then I pour it up into a container. See the progress here. One thing I will say, when you get ready to pour this up into a container, to make sure that it's hot, or at least very warm. Otherwise, of course, it'll break the glass. And I don't recommend storing this in any plastic kind of container. I recommend either stainless steel or glass. I do want to show you, this is some of the cleaner pieces of resin that I got from the trees down on my parents' farm in Alabama. This is actual rosin. It's hardened, and if you hit that with a hammer, it would just pulverize into little bitty rocks and powder. So throw that in there too. It takes a while for the beeswax to soften, and I'm going to take it off of the flame spreader for a little bit. It tends to want to boil if you heat it too much, and I don't want it to boil. I just want it to be very hot. So if you don't have it on a flame spreader, if you're on a wood stove or even a gas stove or whatever, just watch it. You don't want it to just rapidly boil. The reason I don't worry about the little pieces of pine bark and stuff in it, as I said earlier, that tends to settle to the bottom of the jar when I pour it up into the containers. I've got a container here in some warm water just heating up so that I can pour it in. I'm making a lot of salve so that I have it available for sale at our camp meeting coming up, and I've bought some little tins to put it in. So those should be in next week sometime, and then I'll soften the salve again and pour it up in the tins. You can see, I'm not sure if it's showing up, but I'll pull it up and show you. These are the pieces of resin that I just chunked in there. It takes much longer for those than that softer stuff to melt, but it's not too bad. I can already break it up with my little stick here, and so we'll be ready to pour it up here in just a minute. Okay, we're almost there, and you can see, I don't know if it's showing up well enough, but the icky stuff is all down on the bottom. And as I pour it, I'm going to stop when that stuff starts coming in, so it's going to get a lot of the impurities out of it already. And then whatever else is left, as I said, will settle to the bottom. I spilled a little bit of this off of my paddle onto the top of the wood cook stove, and I can get that cleaned up later when the stove is cooled, but a lot of it is burning off and it smells so good. Okay, just about ready. Okay, I think we're close enough now that we can go ahead and pour it up. The handle is cool enough that I can hold on to it and tip it into our container here. You know, it's very interesting. I asked the Lord to show me how to make this salve because I didn't want to waste all this good medicine. So He did. He gave me the idea of the beeswax, and a friend of mine gave me the idea for the oil because I had tried to thin it with turpentine, and of course the turpentine evaporated and my resin just thickened back up. So I don't know if my arm's in the way or if I can, but I don't have a, it's hot to handle on the sides, but anyway, maybe you can see better now. You can see that the trash is kind of just barely now beginning to want to tip over, but most of it is staying right there in the pan. And like I said, I'll make fire starters out of that. As you can see, a lot of trash left in there. I don't know, maybe you can't see it. Let me see if I can tip it. Can you see that? Yeah. That's all little bitty pieces of bark. So here's what we have. That's leftover label there. But that's what we got. Can you see it? Am I in the camera frame? There it is. That will thicken into this, which I think I showed you. It'll look like this salve. It is, like I said, it's very sticky, but it's not as sticky as just plain pine sap. So anyway, and then I'll take and put a little bit of coconut oil around the lid here so that it won't stick the lid shut. And once I get enough, once my containers come next week, then I will soften this and fill the containers that I'll have it available at camp meeting. So if anybody else wants, we will have it available. Okay, see you on the next video.